the dress that didn't fit her world. Sofia Alvarez stood before the narrow mirror that leaned against the peeling wall of her small apartment, holding her breath as she tugged the zipper of her borrowed dress. It was an old satin piece, emerald green, a little too tight around her ribs, but it was the only thing that made her feel like she belonged somewhere beyond her life of scrubbing floors and folding laundry. The reflection staring back at her seemed almost like a stranger, a woman trying desperately to believe that tonight could be her chance to be seen, to be chosen, to finally step out of invisibility. She wasn't rich, she wasn't powerful, but she had a quiet kind of beauty, one that glowed in the softness of her eyes, in the gentleness of her smile, in the courage it took to hope again after too many lonely nights. The small clock above the old refrigerator ticked louder with every passing second. 7:30. She was already running late. Her friend Rosa had helped her fix her hair earlier that evening, curling it into loose waves and whispering encouragements as Sofia doubted herself again and again. "He'll like you," Rosa had said. "You just need to smile." But now, standing there in the silence of her apartment, the confidence had slipped away, replaced by a deep anxiety that pressed against her chest. The man she was meeting tonight, Daniel, had seemed kind when they talked online. He was a financial consultant, handsome in his pictures, charming in his words, and he had chosen her, a maid, out of all the women who must have written to him. Maybe he saw something real in her, something more than her job or her plain background. She wanted to believe that. She wanted to believe that kindness still existed in a world that often looked past people like her. Sofia worked for one of the most powerful businessmen in the city, Alexander Reed. His mansion on the hills looked like something carved out of another universe, with marble corridors, glass balconies, and fountains that sang under moonlight. Every day, she walked through its echoing halls, cleaning rooms bigger than her entire apartment, polishing silver that she could never afford, arranging flowers she could never buy. And yet she took pride in her work. She was precise, careful, respectful, and always invisible but always present. Alexander was a distant man, polite but cold, with eyes that held storms and a voice that carried authority. To him, she was another employee, nothing more. And that was fine, because Sofia never expected to be seen by someone like him. She only hoped to do her job well enough to keep her mother's medicines paid for and her little brother's tuition covered as she picked up her small purse, one that contained exactly 5 crumpled dollars and a photo of her family. She told herself that tonight wasn't about money or class. It was about feeling human again, about being treated like someone who mattered. She locked her apartment door, stepped out into the cool night air, and started her old second-hand car with a silent prayer. The restaurant Daniel had chosen was called La Maison d'Or, a place she had only ever seen in magazines left on the mansion's coffee table. Its glowing chandeliers could be seen from the street, its windows lined with velvet curtains and golden light. When Sofia arrived, her hands were trembling. She parked her car 2 blocks away to avoid the valet who might look at her old vehicle with judgment. The city around her pulsed with life, laughter, and the smell of expensive perfumes. She held her breath as she entered the restaurant, the scent of roses and roasted truffle filling the air, and for a moment, she felt completely out of place. The hostess gave her a long look before offering a polite smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Reservation name?" she asked, and Sofia replied softly, "Daniel Gray." The hostess nodded and led her to a table near the center of the restaurant. The chair felt too soft beneath her, the crystal glasses too delicate beneath her fingers. Every sound, every laugh, every clink of a wine glass reminded her that she did not belong here. She looked down at her phone, checking the time again. 7:50. He wasn't late yet. Minutes passed. The waiter came by and asked if she wanted to order something to drink, and she hesitated, then whispered, "Just water, please." Around her, couples talked in soft tones. Waiters moved like shadows, and Sofia tried to calm her heart. At 8:15, her hope began to fade. She looked around every time the door opened, her smile flickering and then fading again. By 8:30, she was fighting the sting of tears. By 8:45, she could no longer pretend. Her phone buzzed. The message glowed on the screen like a cruel spotlight. "Sorry, Sofia. I saw you when you came in. You're not really what I expected. No offense, but I think we want different things. Good luck." The words blurred as her eyes filled with tears. Shame burned through her, hotter than anything she had ever felt. She had dressed up for this, she had dared to believe that maybe she was enough, and now she felt smaller than ever. She lowered her head, hoping no one noticed the tears slipping down her cheeks, but she could feel eyes on her. The whispers, the soft laughter from a nearby table. Someone even said, "Poor thing," and it made her chest tighten until she could barely breathe. What she didn't realize was that in the far corner of the restaurant, sitting alone with a file of documents open before him, Alexander Reed had been watching the scene unfold. His dinner meeting had been canceled last minute and he had chosen to dine alone, reviewing contracts while the world around him carried on with laughter and wine. He hadn't paid much attention at first, just another night, another table, another quiet meal, until his eyes landed on the woman in the green dress. There was something painfully familiar about the way she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the way she tried to make herself invisible even as her heart was breaking. It took him a moment to realize who she was, his maid, Sofia Alvarez. For years she had moved through his mansion like a soft breeze, silent, efficient, never complaining, never asking for more. He had seen her 1,000 times without really seeing her. But now, watching her sitting alone at a table meant for two, tears glistening under the candlelight, something inside him shifted. He saw not his employee but a woman trying to hold herself together while the world broke her apart. And for reasons he couldn't explain, that sight hurt him more than he expected. Alexander closed the file, his eyes fixed on Sofia as the waiter came to her table again. He could tell she was trying to smile, trying to leave gracefully, but her trembling hands betrayed her. When she reached for her purse, he saw the corner of an old family photo sticking out. He stood up without thinking, driven by an impulse that overrode logic, business, or propriety. The people around him might see a billionaire walking toward a maid, but in that moment, Alexander didn't care what the world thought. Sofia looked up in shock when he stopped beside her table. For a moment she thought she was imagining things. "Mr. Reed?" she whispered, her voice barely audible, her cheeks flushing crimson. She had seen him in expensive suits, surrounded by investors, never in a place where she could meet his eyes directly. Now he stood there, his expression unreadable, his gaze softer than she had ever seen. "Miss Alvarez," he said quietly, his voice carrying warmth that surprised even himself. "May I sit?" She blinked, confused. You want to sit here?" He nodded. "I would appreciate the company. It seems we both have had an unexpectedly lonely evening." His words were simple, but the kindness behind them wrapped around her like a blanket against the cold. She didn't know what to say, but she nodded, unable to refuse. He took the seat across from her, his eyes steady on hers. "I saw what happened," he said gently. "You don't deserve that." Sofia lowered her gaze, her throat tight. "It's nothing," she murmured. "Just a mistake." "No," he said firmly, but his tone remained soft. "It's not nothing. People forget how much courage it takes to show up, to believe someone might see you for who you are. That man's mistake is not seeing your worth. Don't let it make you doubt it." His words hit her heart like sunlight through clouds. She had never heard him speak like that, not to anyone, certainly not to her. She looked at him and saw not the businessman she cleaned up after, but a man who carried his own kind of loneliness, different from hers, but just as heavy. "Please let me buy you dinner," he said suddenly, "not because I pity you, but because you deserve to eat somewhere beautiful without feeling small." She hesitated. "I can't afford—" "You don't have to," he interrupted gently. "Just allow yourself to be here with me. As equals, at least for tonight." Something inside her shifted. Maybe it was exhaustion, maybe it was hope, maybe it was the warmth in his eyes that made her believe him. Slowly she nodded. "Okay," she whispered. The waiter returned, eyes wide at the sight of the millionaire dining with the maid, but Alexander ignored him completely. He ordered wine for both, then turned back to Sofia. "Tell me about you," he said. "Not about work, not about cleaning the mansion. Tell me what you dream about when you're not holding a broom." And so as the candles flickered between them, Sofia began to speak, hesitantly at first, then with growing ease. She told him about her mother, about the small bakery they used to run before her father's illness, about the dream she still held of opening one again someday. She spoke of her love for baking, for creating things that brought people joy. And Alexander listened, truly listened, like no one had ever listened to her before. For the first time in years, Sofia forgot where she came from, She forgot the whispers, the pity, the humiliation. Across from her sat a man who didn't see a maid. He saw a woman with dreams, strength, and grace. And for Alexander, sitting there with her, something long dormant inside him began to stir. The emptiness of his mansion, the silence of his wealth, all suddenly felt unbearable. He wanted to fill that silence with laughter, with warmth, with something real. That night, under the glow of chandeliers and the quiet hum of a restaurant that had never felt so human, two lives quietly began to change. Neither of them realized it yet. But what started as a moment of kindness would soon unravel the boundaries between wealth and humility, loneliness and love, power and vulnerability. For Sophia, it was the night she stopped believing she was invisible. For Alexander, it was the night he finally learned how to see. The morning after the kindness. The soft light of dawn crept through the narrow curtains of Sophia's apartment, painting pale gold across the cracked walls. She woke slowly, her mind still half-anchored in the dreamlike haze of the night before. The memory of the elegant restaurant, of Alexander's calm voice and kind eyes, replayed in her thoughts like a scene she couldn't believe had truly happened. She had sat across from one of the wealthiest men in the city, shared a meal with him, and for a few precious hours felt like she wasn't just someone who cleaned his home, she was someone he saw. The taste of the warm bread and laughter still lingered in her memory, and though nothing romantic had been said, something unspoken had stirred between them. But as the morning light brightened, the reality of her life pressed back in. The bills on the kitchen counter hadn't disappeared. The rent was still due in 3 days. Her mother's medication refill still needed to be paid for. The car still made that strange rattling noise every time she started it. Sophia sighed, rubbing her eyes as she sat up on her small bed. Last night had been beautiful, but it belonged to another world. His world. And she knew that stepping back into her routine would mean locking that moment away, pretending it hadn't meant as much as it did. Still, there was something different in her that morning. When she looked into the mirror, she didn't see the same tired woman who usually stared back. Her eyes looked alive, her face somehow lighter. Alexander's words from the night before echoed in her mind. "You don't deserve that. People forget how much courage it takes to show up." She whispered them to herself like a quiet mantra as she fixed her uniform and tied her hair back. For the first time in years, she walked into the mansion not as if she were invisible, but as someone who had a story that mattered. The grand marble foyer greeted her as always. Silent, perfect, polished, but today she felt the weight of Alexander's gaze even though he wasn't there. The house staff moved about their duties in quiet routine. Maria, the older cook, glanced up and said with her usual teasing tone, "Sophia, you're glowing today." "Something special happen?" Sophia blushed and laughed softly, shaking her head. "Just slept well for once," she said, though her heart fluttered at the thought of the real reason behind her glow. It was mid-morning when Alexander returned from his meeting downtown. His car glided through the driveway, black and immaculate as always. But when he stepped out, his expression wasn't the usual guarded mask of business detachment. He looked distracted, thoughtful, as if something inside him had shifted. His assistant, Mark, trailed behind him, reading through notes, but Alexander barely listened. His mind was still replaying the look on Sophia's face when she had finally smiled at him last night. That smile had been genuine, not the polite one he received from business partners or socialites, but a smile that carried warmth and gratitude. When he entered the mansion, his eyes instinctively searched for her. He found her in the hallway near the staircase, dusting a framed portrait. For a brief moment, neither of them spoke. The distance between employer and employee hung heavy in the air, and Sophia's hands froze mid-motion, her heart racing. But Alexander smiled. Not the rehearsed kind he used in boardrooms, a real one that softened the hard edges of his face. "Good morning, Sophia," he said quietly. She turned, startled, and nodded respectfully. "Good morning, sir. How are you feeling today?" he asked, as though it was the most natural thing to ask one's maid. Sophia hesitated. "I'm fine, thank you, and thank you for last night. I didn't know what to say then." "You don't need to thank me," he said gently. "I only did what any decent person should have done." But Sophia smiled faintly. Not everyone would have. Their eyes met for a heartbeat longer than necessary. In that small exchange, something passed between them, something both of them felt but didn't name. Then, before the silence could stretch further, Mark cleared his throat from the corridor. reminding Alexander that reality still existed outside this fragile moment. He gave her a polite nod and walked away, leaving her heart racing and her hands trembling slightly as she returned to work. The days that followed carried a quiet transformation neither of them spoke of, but both felt. Alexander began noticing things he had ignored for years. The way Sophia hummed softly as she worked in the garden, the way she comforted the gardener's child when he scraped his knee, the way her presence seemed to bring warmth into corners of the house that had long felt cold. He found himself leaving his office door open more often, just to hear the faint sounds of life beyond his work. Sophia, on the other hand, tried to hide her confusion behind her routines. Every time she saw him, her heart leapt in a way that scared her. He was her employer, a man from a world she could never reach, and yet when he spoke to her, she didn't feel small. He never made her feel like a servant. He spoke to her like an equal, like someone whose words mattered. She told herself it was only gratitude, but deep inside she knew it was something more dangerous. A week later, something unexpected happened. Alexander called the entire staff into the dining hall, something he rarely did. The long table gleamed under the chandelier as everyone gathered, whispering curiously. Sophia stood among them, her heart pounding, unsure what was happening. Alexander walked in, looking more relaxed than usual, and addressed them with a calm voice. "I wanted to thank all of you for your hard work," he said. "I realize I don't say it enough. This house doesn't just run because of money or management. It runs because of the people in this room. Each of you makes it what it is." The staff looked stunned. Some smiled shyly, others exchanged glances, but all were touched. No employer had ever spoken like that. And when Alexander's eyes flickered briefly toward Sophia, it didn't go unnoticed. Maria nudged her gently, whispering, "Looks like the boss has a heart after all." Sophia's cheeks flushed, but she said nothing. Later that afternoon, as she was organizing books in the study, Alexander appeared at the doorway. "Do you have a moment?" he asked, and she nodded. He stepped closer, hesitating slightly as though choosing his words carefully. "There's a charity gala next month," he began. "It's for educational funding and community development. I'll be donating a substantial amount, but I've realized I don't really understand what these charities actually mean to the people they're supposed to help." You volunteer sometimes, don't you?" Sophia blinked in surprise. "Yes, sir. At the community center on weekends." He nodded thoughtfully. "Would you mind showing me someday? I'd like to see how these funds actually reach the ground level. Not as a business visit, just to learn." The sincerity in his tone made her chest tighten. "Of course I can arrange that," she said softly. That weekend, Alexander showed up in simple clothes. No suit, no tie, no driver. He looked almost ordinary, except for the quiet authority that never quite left him. When Sophia introduced him to the volunteers and children at the center, the difference between his world and theirs became painfully visible. But instead of standing apart, Alexander knelt beside a boy who was struggling with a puzzle, helping him piece it together. Sophia watched him with quiet admiration, realizing that behind the billionaire facade was a man who had simply forgotten what it meant to connect. As the day went on, something remarkable happened. The children laughed around him, the volunteers chatted freely, and for the first time in years, Alexander looked at peace. Later, when they sat under a tree outside, Sophia handed him a small paper bag. Inside were 2 homemade cookies she had baked that morning. "They're nothing fancy," she said shyly, "but they're my mother's recipe." He took one, smiled, and bit into it. "This," he said with genuine pleasure, "is better than anything I've eaten in a restaurant." Sophia laughed softly. "You're just being kind." "No," he said simply, meeting her eyes. "I'm being honest." There was a silence between them then, the kind that didn't feel empty but full. The air seemed to hum with unspoken words. They both looked away at the same time, afraid of what might show in their faces. But life, as always, doesn't let magic linger quietly. Word spread quickly through the mansion, whispers of the boss spending his weekend with the maid. The gossip began as murmurs but soon grew into judgmental laughter behind closed doors. Some of the staff smiled to her face but whispered behind her back. Others treated her differently, their respect turning into envy or suspicion. Sophia felt it all. The eyes, the whispers, the sudden coldness. It made her chest ache. She tried to ignore it, to focus on her work. But when Maria finally pulled her aside one evening and said softly, "Be careful, Sophia. People are talking. They think you're getting too close to him," she felt her heart sink. She wanted to defend herself, to say that nothing inappropriate had happened, that it was just kindness, just mutual understanding. But a part of her knew that no one would believe it. The world loved stories of scandal more than stories of compassion. That night, she stood alone in her apartment, staring at the reflection of herself once again. The woman in the mirror looked different now, not because of makeup or dresses, but because she was torn between gratitude and fear. Alexander had given her a glimpse of something beautiful: respect, warmth, humanity. But she knew that beauty could easily be twisted into rumor by those who didn't understand it. And somewhere across the city, in a mansion that suddenly felt too large and too empty, Alexander sat alone in his study, staring at the glow of his phone screen where her number was saved. He wanted to message her, to tell her that the day at the community center had meant more to him than he could explain. But he didn't. He knew the world they lived in was cruel to moments like these. Still, he couldn't stop thinking about her laughter, her kindness, her courage to live with dignity even when the world had humiliated her. And deep down he knew, the night he saw her crying in that restaurant had changed something in him forever. What he didn't yet know was that the world was about to test them both, brutally, publicly, and in ways neither could imagine, because sometimes kindness is the first spark that lights a storm. When the world began to whisper. The following week unfolded with an unease that neither Sophia nor Alexander could ignore. The air in the mansion seemed to carry a subtle tension, a quiet rustle of gossip that traveled through the corridors faster than footsteps. Whispers followed Sophia wherever she went. Conversations stopped the moment she entered a room, replaced by awkward smiles that vanished as soon as she turned her back. The mansion, once merely her place of work, had begun to feel like a stage where every glance and every gesture was judged, misinterpreted, and twisted into stories she never meant to write. It all began with a single photograph. A volunteer from the community center had posted a picture online, a simple image of Alexander kneeling beside a group of children with Sophia standing nearby, holding a tray of cookies, both of them smiling warmly. The post had been innocent, captioned with gratitude for the billionaire's unexpected visit. But the internet has its own appetite for stories, and by morning that single photograph had spread across social platforms with captions that turned kindness into controversy. "Billionaire CEO and his maid secret weekend together," one headline read. "Is love blooming between the boss and the help?" Another mocked. Within hours, the image had reached business tabloids and gossip blogs, each spinning its own version of the truth. When Sophia arrived at work that morning, she noticed the difference immediately. The guards at the gate exchanged knowing glances, and the kitchen staff greeted her with forced politeness. Maria, ever the voice of reason, approached her quietly, worry clouding her usually cheerful face. "Sophia," she said gently, "I think you should stay out of sight for a few days. People are talking. It's not fair, but it's spreading fast." Sophia's hands trembled as she set down the tray she was carrying. "What are they saying?" she asked softly, though part of her didn't want to hear the answer. Maria sighed. "That you and Mr. Reed are involved. That you've been seeing him in secret. You know how people are. They turn anything pure into poison." Sophia's throat tightened. "But that's not true," she whispered, almost to herself. "He was just being kind. He helped me when I was humiliated. He's been good to me." "I know," Maria said, her voice heavy with sympathy. "But the world doesn't care about kindness, child. It only believes what it wants to believe." For the rest of the morning, Sophia tried to lose herself in her chores. She scrubbed floors, dusted windows, and straightened linens with trembling hands, her mind spinning in circles. Every laugh she heard in the hallway felt directed at her. Every look felt like an accusation, and when she finally gathered the courage to check her phone during lunch, the shock nearly made her drop it. Dozens of notifications blinked on the screen, messages from old friends, acquaintances, even distant relatives. Some asked if the rumors were true. Others sent warnings or crude jokes. She scrolled through the posts and saw her own face beside Alexander's, her name printed in bold letters in articles that painted her as an opportunist, a woman using charm and pity to climb the social ladder. Tears filled her eyes. She turned off her phone, her heart pounding with humiliation. She had lived her life quietly, working hard, asking for nothing, and now the world had dragged her name into a storm she never asked for. Meanwhile, across the city, Alexander was sitting in his office at Reed Enterprises, staring at the same photograph on his screen. His assistant Mark stood awkwardly by the door, waiting for instructions, unsure of what to say. "It's trending everywhere," he said finally. "They're calling it a scandal. Some shareholders are concerned about image damage." Alexander's jaw tightened. "Image damage," he repeated coldly. "Is that what they call kindness now?" Mark hesitated. "It's not fair, sir, but people love a story, especially one that brings someone powerful down a notch." "They think I know what they think," Alexander interrupted, his voice sharp. He closed his laptop and leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. For years he had lived his life in control of his business, his image, his world. But now, because of one act of compassion, everything felt as though it were slipping beyond his grasp. Yet it wasn't his own reputation that troubled him most. It was hers. Sophia, gentle, hard-working, humble Sophia, the woman who had done nothing but show kindness to everyone she met. She didn't deserve this. By evening, he had made his decision. He left the office early, his driver startled to see him heading back to the mansion hours before his usual schedule. When he entered, the staff stiffened. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. The silence was palpable. He ignored it all and went straight to the kitchen, where he found Sophia standing by the counter, her back turned. "Washing dishes with trembling hands, Sophia," he said softly. She froze, the sound of his voice both comforting and terrifying. She turned slowly, her eyes red from crying. "Mr. Reed," she whispered, trying to compose herself. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean for any of this to happen." "You don't have to apologize," he said firmly, stepping closer. "You did nothing wrong. The only thing you're guilty of is being decent in a world that no longer understands decency." Her lips quivered. "They're saying horrible things, sir. My mother called me crying. My brother saw the news. They think I—" Her voice broke before she could finish. Alexander's expression softened. "Listen to me," he said, his tone steady but filled with emotion. "I will handle this. You have my word." "Please," she said, her voice trembling. "Don't make it worse for yourself. I can quit. I'll find another job. I don't want to bring shame to your name." The words stung him. "Quit," he repeated, disbelief flooding his voice. "Because people can't tell the difference between truth and gossip? No, Sophia. I won't let you disappear just to protect their ignorance." For a moment they stood in silence, the distance between their worlds collapsing. She looked at him and the man who had everything and then saw genuine pain in his eyes. It was the same pain she felt, the same helplessness, and that realization made her tears fall even harder. Alexander wanted to comfort her, to reach out and wipe away the tears streaking her cheeks. But he held himself back. He knew that even the smallest gesture could become another weapon in the world's hands. So instead he said quietly, "Trust me, Sophia. Let me fix this the right way." The next morning the city woke to a shock. Alexander Reed had issued a public statement through every major network, defending Sophia by name. His voice on the televised interview was calm, resolute, and powerful. "Sophia Alvarez is one of the most honest, hardworking individuals I've ever met," he said. "The photo circulating online shows an act of community service, not scandal. I stand by her integrity fully. Anyone suggesting otherwise should reflect on what they've lost: the ability to recognize goodness without cynicism." The interview went viral. Some people admired his courage, others called it reckless. But for Sophia, sitting alone in her apartment watching the broadcast, it was something else entirely. It was validation. No one had ever defended her before. No one had ever spoken her name with pride. She pressed a hand to her heart as tears filled her eyes again, not from sadness this time, but from something deeper: gratitude, awe, and a fragile, growing affection for the man who had risked everything to protect her dignity. However, the backlash was not entirely kind. A few tabloids doubled down, twisting his defense into evidence of guilt. "Why so emotional, Mr. Reed?" One headline sneered. "Is the billionaire hiding more than he admits?" Investors questioned his judgment. Board members whispered about potential scandals. But Alexander didn't care. For the first time in years, he felt that he was standing for something real. Not for profit, not for power, but for truth. Later that week, he called Sophia into his office. She entered nervously, unsure what to expect. He gestured for her to sit, his tone gentler than ever. "How are you holding up?" he asked. "I'm managing," she said softly. "I don't know how to thank you." "You don't have to," he replied. "You've reminded me what it means to have a conscience. I'd forgotten." She met his gaze and saw exhaustion in his eyes, not the kind that came from work, but from fighting against a world that refused to understand compassion. "You shouldn't have to go through all this for me," she whispered. "And you shouldn't have to suffer humiliation for simply existing," he countered. The room fell silent. Outside, rain began to fall softly against the windows, filling the pause between them with a quiet rhythm. Sophia looked down at her hands, twisting the hem of her sleeve. "Why are you doing this?" she asked finally. "Why do you care so much?" Alexander leaned back, exhaling slowly. "Because when I saw you that night, sitting alone, trying not to cry, I realized how much I'd forgotten about humanity. You made me remember, and now seeing you treated unfairly, it's something I can't ignore." Sophia's chest tightened. No one had ever spoken to her like that before. His words felt like both comfort and danger. Comfort because they were kind, danger because they stirred something inside her heart that she didn't want to name. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice breaking. "For everything." As she stood to leave, Alexander's voice stopped her once more. "Sophia," he said, and when she turned, she saw a rare vulnerability in his eyes. "Don't let their words change who you are. The world may be cruel, but it doesn't get to define you. Remember that." That night, Sophia sat by her window watching the rain pour over the city lights. The streets shimmered with reflections, and she thought about how easily life could turn, from humiliation to kindness, from kindness to chaos. Yet through it all, one thing had remained constant: Alexander's faith in her. She didn't know where this connection would lead or what it might cost them both, but deep inside, a new kind of courage began to form. The courage to stand tall even when the world tried to pull her down. And far away, in his mansion that no longer felt empty, Alexander sat by the fireplace with a glass of untouched wine, staring into the flames. For years he had built empires of wealth and control, but tonight he realized something profound: that one genuine human connection could shake the walls of his entire world more than any business storm ever could. Neither of them knew it yet, but the fire they had sparked, born from humiliation and compassion, was about to test their hearts in ways they could never imagine. Because the world wasn't done whispering, and not every whisper fades quietly. The price of kindness. The storm that had started as whispers now roared into a full-blown tempest that neither Sophia nor Alexander could escape. The media frenzy refused to die. If anything, it grew sharper, more venomous as days turned into weeks. Articles questioned Alexander's judgment, dissected Sophia's background, and painted their every word and glance in scandalous colors. Photographers began lurking near the gates of the mansion, hoping to capture another image that could feed the hungry headlines. Reporters even camped outside Sophia's small apartment, shouting questions about her relationship with her employer. Each morning she walked past them with her head down, her heart pounding, pretending she didn't hear the cruel laughter that followed her. Inside the mansion, the atmosphere changed completely. What had once been a place of quiet routine now buzzed with discomfort. The staff avoided her eyes, afraid of being caught in gossip by association. Some treated her with cold politeness, while others, jealous or fearful, whispered behind her back. The mansion's walls, which had once echoed only with silence, now seemed to hum with judgment. Sophia tried to keep working, scrubbing, polishing, organizing, clinging to the one thing that still felt familiar, but even that could not protect her from the feeling that she no longer belonged there. Alexander noticed it all. Every time he passed by and saw her forced smile, every time he heard the distant sound of her soft footsteps echoing through the halls that others now treated as a stage for ridicule, something inside him burned with quiet fury. He wanted to fix it, to use his power to silence the world, but he knew how fragile the line was between defending her and destroying her further. The more he spoke publicly, the more people twisted his intentions. His board of directors grew restless, demanding that he address the scandal by taking decisive action. He knew what they meant: to fire her, to end the story by removing its target. But Alexander refused. He had faced ruthless competitors, manipulative investors, and even betrayal. But he had never faced something that felt so personally unjust. He couldn't bear the thought of punishing an innocent woman for the crime of being seen. Still, the pressure mounted. Shareholders threatened withdrawal, and his company's stocks began to dip as the controversy refused to fade. Every business interview, every corporate event, every charity function he attended, the same question awaited him. "Mr. Reed, what is your relationship with your housekeeper?" The repetition was endless, exhausting, and humiliating. And through it all, Alexander's composure began to crack. Not from fear for himself, but from helplessness for Sophia. One evening, after yet another tense meeting with his board, he found her in the garden, her figure outlined by the faint glow of the moon. She was sitting on the bench where the roses grew, the same spot where she often took her lunch breaks away from everyone's eyes. Tonight, though, she wasn't eating or resting. She was just sitting there, her shoulders trembling, her face buried in her hands. Alexander hesitated, then approached quietly. "Sophia," he said softly, and she startled slightly, wiping at her cheeks quickly, though the tears had already betrayed her. "I'm sorry," she said immediately, her voice shaking. "I shouldn't be out here. I should be inside finishing—" "Stop," he interrupted gently. "You don't have to apologize for crying." She looked at him, her eyes red but defiant. "I'm not crying because of me," she said bitterly. "I'm crying because I'm ruining your life. Your company, your name. They're all being dragged through the mud because of me. I should have left the moment it started." "You've done nothing wrong," he said firmly, sitting down beside her. "And if the world can't see that, it's the world that's blind, not you." Her voice cracked. "You don't understand. They'll never stop. They'll keep coming after you until they destroy everything you've built. And it's all because of one act of kindness. Because you defended someone who isn't worth your time. Don't you ever say that again," Alexander said sharply, turning to face her. "Don't you dare call yourself unworthy. Do you have any idea how much you've changed me, Sophia? I've spent years surrounded by people who only cared about money, power, status, but you reminded me what it means to be human again." For a moment, the only sound was the rustle of leaves in the night wind. Sophia's breath caught in her throat. "Then be human," she whispered, tears slipping down her face again. "Let me go. Before it costs you everything." The words hit him harder than he expected. He wanted to protest, to tell her she was wrong, that he didn't care what the world thought. But as he looked into her eyes, he saw the depth of her sincerity, the pain of a woman who had endured too much, who carried the weight of shame she didn't deserve, and who would rather vanish than be the cause of someone else's suffering. He exhaled slowly, his chest tightening. "If that's what you want," he said quietly, his voice breaking for the first time since she had known him, "I won't stop you. But know this, Sophia, I will never regret defending you. And no amount of scandal or loss will ever make me ashamed of the kindness we shared." Sophia turned away, unable to meet his gaze. "Thank you," she whispered, and the words felt like a farewell. The next morning, before the sun had fully risen, Sophia packed her few belongings into a small suitcase. Her uniform hung neatly on the door, pressed and folded one last time. She walked through the silent mansion with slow, deliberate steps, each one heavier than the last. The marble floors reflected her shadow. The chandeliers glimmered faintly, and the echo of her footsteps was the only sound in the vast emptiness. At the front door, she paused, looking back once more at the house that had been both her livelihood and her prison. Alexander didn't appear to stop her. Perhaps he couldn't. Perhaps he knew that if he saw her one more time, he wouldn't be able to let her go. Outside, the air was cool and still. A new day was beginning, but for Sophia, it felt like the end of something she couldn't name. She took one last look at the mansion's towering silhouette, then turned and walked down the hill, her heart aching but resolute. Days passed, then weeks. Without her, the mansion felt hollow. The rooms remained spotless but lifeless. The flowers in the vases wilted faster, as if missing the gentle hands that once arranged them. The air carried a silence that even the ticking of the grand clock couldn't fill. Alexander buried himself in work again, trying to pretend he was fine, but his focus fractured. Meetings blurred together. Conversations became noise. The city that once bowed before him now felt like a cage. Every night when he returned home, he half expected to see her, to hear her soft greeting in the hall, to find her humming in the garden, but she was gone, and the absence cut deeper than he wanted to admit. Meanwhile, in a small apartment on the edge of the city, Sophia tried to rebuild her life. She found part-time work at a local bakery, her hands kneading dough the way her mother had taught her years ago. The smell of bread and sugar filled her days, and though the job paid little, it gave her peace. She smiled again, slowly, quietly, though the sadness never fully left her. Every time she saw the evening news, every time she passed a headline with Alexander's name, her heart twisted. He was still fighting, defending his company, rebuilding his image, standing tall. But she could see the weariness in his eyes through the photographs. She wished she could tell him that she was proud of him, that his kindness had changed her life forever, but she couldn't. She had promised herself that she would stay away, that she would protect him by staying silent. One rainy afternoon, as Sophia stood by the bakery window watching people hurry past with umbrellas, she saw a familiar black car stop across the street. Her breath caught. The door opened and Alexander stepped out. He was wearing no suit this time, no tie, just a simple coat, his hair damp from the rain. For a moment she froze, unsure if she was imagining him, but then he looked up, saw her through the window, and their eyes met. Time seemed to stop. He crossed the street slowly, the rain falling harder with every step. His gaze locked on hers. She stepped back, heart pounding, her mind a storm of confusion. When he entered the bakery, the small bell above the door chimed softly, and the world around them faded into silence. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I know," he said, his tone quiet but firm, "but I had to see you. I've spent every day pretending I could move on, that the silence didn't matter. But it does. Everything feels wrong without you, Sophia." Tears filled her eyes. "I left to protect you," she said, "to give you peace. And you did," he replied. "But you also took mine." She looked at him helplessly. "What do you want from me?" "The truth," he said simply. "Did I mean anything to you? Was I just a man who felt sorry for you, or did you feel it too? That connection, that whatever it is that makes it impossible for me to forget you." Sophia's lips parted, but no words came out. The bakery felt too small, the air too heavy. She looked down, her voice barely audible. "You changed my life, Alexander. You made me believe in goodness again. But you belong to a world where love like this doesn't survive." He stepped closer, his eyes searching hers. "Then let me change that world." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The rain outside softened, turning to a gentle drizzle as though the sky itself had grown tired of weeping. Sophia felt her defenses crumble. Maybe it was the exhaustion, maybe it was the longing, maybe it was the truth, but in that moment, she realized that no matter how far she ran, his presence would always follow her. And when he reached out and gently took her trembling hand, she didn't pull away. Outside, the clouds began to part. A fragile light broke through, spilling across the city streets. But both of them knew this was not the end of their story. It was the beginning of the hardest chapter yet. Because love, when born out of compassion, must face its greatest test before it becomes destiny. The choice that changed everything. The smell of freshly baked bread still filled the small bakery when Alexander and Sophia stood facing one another, the world outside slowly quieting after the storm. For a moment they said nothing. Their silence carried more weight than words ever could. The rain on the window sounded like a heartbeat, steady, fragile, alive. Sophia could see the exhaustion in Alexander's eyes. Not the tiredness of a man who had lost sleep, but of one who had fought too long against a world that refused to understand him. He looked different now, stripped of the armor of wealth and authority. He was just a man standing in front of the woman who had reminded him what kindness felt like. The woman who had unknowingly become the reason he could not go back to the cold, quiet life he once lived. Sophia tried to steady her voice, but it trembled with every word. "Alexander, you shouldn't have come. The cameras will follow you again. People will talk. Let them," he said softly, stepping closer. "They've been talking for months, and yet not one of them has spoken the truth. I'm done living a life controlled by lies." She looked down, twisting her hands together. "You don't understand how heavy it is to be the reason someone loses everything. I can't be that reason for you. You built an empire. I just clean floors." He shook his head, the corners of his mouth curving in a sad smile. "I built walls, not an empire. You were the first person who ever looked through them." Those words broke something inside her. All the restraint she had built over the past weeks began to crumble. Her heart wanted to believe him, but her mind still whispered fear. She had lived her whole life surviving disappointment, not daring to dream too high because the fall always hurt more. "What are you asking from me?" she finally whispered. "I'm not asking," he replied quietly. "I'm promising that I'll fight differently this time. Not for image or business, but for truth. For you." When he said her name, it wasn't with pity or possession. It was with reverence, as though he understood that she had been the one to teach him the value of sincerity in a world obsessed with appearances. She wanted to answer, to tell him that she felt the same, but before she could, a woman entered the bakery, one of the journalists who had followed Alexander for weeks. Her camera hung from her neck, her expression sharp with curiosity. Sophia froze. Alexander instinctively placed himself between her and the reporter, his protective instinct stronger than his caution. "Mr. Reed," the reporter said quickly, "the world is dying to know the truth. Are the rumors real? Is this woman the reason you've been defying your board? People say you're risking everything for her." For a moment, Alexander simply looked at the reporter, then at Sophia, and something in his face softened into calm determination. He had spent his life answering questions with practiced diplomacy, choosing words that satisfied everyone but himself, but not this time. "Yes," he said finally, his voice even. "She is the reason, but not the way you think. She reminded me that success without compassion is empty. She taught me that wealth means nothing if you forget what it means to be human. If that's a scandal, then I accept it." The reporter blinked, startled. "So you're confirming—" "I'm confirming," he interrupted gently, "that I owe this woman more respect than the entire business world combined." The bakery fell silent. The journalist, unsure how to twist sincerity into gossip, quietly backed away. Sophia's eyes filled with tears, not because of the words themselves, but because of the courage it took to speak them. She had seen powerful men defend their fortunes, never their hearts. Alexander had just risked his entire reputation to tell the truth that mattered to him. Later that evening, the story spread again. But this time, it sounded different. Some mocked him, but many admired him. The same public that had once condemned him began to see his honesty as strength. Headlines shifted tone. The billionaire who chose integrity over image. For the first time, Sophia's name appeared beside his, not as scandal, but as inspiration. Still, Sophia could not shake her fear. When the bakery closed that night, she sat with him at a small wooden table near the window, their untouched cups of coffee growing cold between them. "Even if people start believing you," she said softly, "I'll always be the woman from nowhere. You'll always be the man from everywhere. The world won't forget that difference." Alexander reached across the table, his fingers brushing hers. "Maybe it's time we stop living by what the world remembers and start living by what our hearts refuse to forget." She smiled sadly. "You make it sound simple." "It is simple," he replied. "It's everything else that makes it complicated." Weeks turned into months. The scandal slowly faded as another story took its place in the endless cycle of public fascination. Alexander stepped back from a few of his company's boards, choosing to focus on projects that brought real change. Educational programs, community centers, and scholarships for underprivileged youth. Each initiative carried one quiet signature name: the Sophia Foundation. When reporters asked why he chose that name, his answer never changed. Because the greatest teachers don't stand in classrooms. They stand in our lives and show us what matters. Sophia continued to work at the bakery, but her world expanded. She began teaching free baking classes for young girls who couldn't afford culinary school, using the same recipes her mother had once used to feed hope during hard times. She didn't do it for recognition, but word spread quickly. People started calling her the woman who turned humiliation into grace.